So this presentation is going to be all about butter. Which, okay, I know that I say butter weirdly.
Butter.
Please,
That's
butter,
how you're
innit?
supposed to say it.
Butter.
Butter, innit?
Butter.
Don't be posting
Butter.
comments saying, "Oh, just say butter weird."
Butter.
I don't care.
Filthy
Oh, Americans,
American
you put a
hogs.
D in butter. Americans
Butter.
put a D in butter. They go butter, butter, butter. So
Butter.
don't be making fun of the way I say butter in the comments.
Betty
Whatever you do,
bought a bit of better butter.
Betty butter, butter, butter. First things first. I want to play a game of Who Wants to Be? And next slide, please, yeah.
Oh. Do I win butter?
The question is, which of these is not
Ooh.
a type of butter? We have Nita Kibe,
That sounds like butter to me.
Smen, Holy, or Cultured.
Okay.
I'm
Let's
going
find
to
out
see
if
holy.
Smen is a type of butter. I know that cultured is a butter is cultured.
I'm saying it's holy. That's my choice.
I'm gonna say semen is not a type of butter.
Semen. Okay, so watch this. This is a really clever trick I've managed to work out. Ignore the fact that a cursor is going to appear. So, Rach, you think holy, right?
Yeah.
And you think smen?
Yeah.
Nah.
Smen.
Okay, let's find it. I know, it's so clever, isn't it? How did I
I'm-
do that?
I'm
That's so
that?
smart, isn't it?
So impressed.
Well, the answer is
Oh shit.
holy.
Because who would make up the word smen?
That's true. That was yeah.
Okay, let me let me give you some context. Nita Kibe is an Ethiopian style of butter. It's similar to ghee in that it's a clarified butter, but it's more spiced, so they put lots of stuff in it when they're clarifying it.
Ooh, sounds good.
Cultured butter obviously is cultured. That means it's has some added bacteria, so it essentially turns into yogurt butter. Cultured generally tends to be a little bit more sour.
A little
But it
bit
tends to last a lot longer.
of lactobacillus in there.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, it tends to last a little bit longer. A lot of the butter you get in like mainland Europe tends to be cultured. Though the butter you get in the UK and the US tends not to be cultured butter. Though you can buy specifically cultured butter. Smen is from Yemen. And general sort of Middle Eastern, North African areas use it. That's also a cultured butter. But it's also really, really salty. They put so much salt in it, essentially to preserve it.
Yeah. Makes sense.
So this lasts a lot longer than normal butter.
But does it last as long as bog butter? That's the question.
I don't think it lasts as long as bog butter.
5,000 years, give or take.
No, I don't think so. Well, I know what you're thinking now. How do you make butter? You're thinking it, aren't you? That's what you're thinking. Well, it's actually very, very simple. First things first, you need a cow.
I love good cow.
The cow is really important in making butter. Although you can make goat's butter and etc. But we're talking butter here. Get yourself a cow. Feed it well. Because you want to feed it really nice grass-fed feed. Grass feed. You want to feed it grass. You want to be treating it well. You want to be making sure it's living a healthy, happy life. Because if you don't do that, if you just feed it corn and you just sort of like battery farm them, the butter actually comes out white because there's something in the grass and it living a really, really stress-free life makes it the yellowy colour that that's associated with butter.
That's interesting.
You just go the margarine
Yeah.
route
So
and add yellow food colouring.
Well, maybe we'll get onto that. That's something that people do actually do if they have really badly kept cows, is they do dye the butter.
Interesting. I happen to know that for chicken eggs, to make the yolks really yellow, they feed the chickens special feed to make sure that the yolks are yellow, so it's like pre-dyed.
Well, milk your cow, get yourself some milk. What you need from the milk is the cream. So you want the thicker, you essentially, they separate essentially, and you want the thicker cream. I don't think you can use squirty cream when you're making butter, but you can just use normal cream.
I wonder if you could. I bet you could.
I'm
sure it would be
You could, but it's a waste of resources.
It is a waste.
Yeah.
It is foolish to do that.
Sweet.
Yeah.
You'd have to wash out.
You
all the
can
sugar.
you can make butter really easy at home because you just need to over whip the cream. So agitate it. In the olden days, they would use those
Churns.
what are they?
Churner.
Yeah, the churny things to churn it. But essentially, you just need to whip it. So you could use like a normal whisk. You could use your sort of electric whisk and whip the cream.
I saw a couple of kids do this by accident in school. So I was working as a teaching assistant, and it was in like a food tech classroom, and they were making like cream to go on a cake, and they over whisked it, and they were so disappointed. It was just this, like,
yeah.
Did you tell them they'd done an amazing thing and they've made butter?
I don't remember if I did. Somebody certainly told them that they'd made butter, and I was like, "Oh, that's how it happens."
Yeah, it's really, really simple. You just whisk it until it's whipped cream, and then whisk it some more, and eventually it starts to separate. And what you get is you get the butter, which is generally like yellow, assuming that you've got good milk or good cream rather. And then you get the buttermilk, which is more of a liquidy and substance, which people use for baking and flavouring and stuff. So you whip it until it turns into butter, and then you have your butter.
Delicious.
It's very exciting, isn't it? It's weird that we found out that you can make butter by agitating milk, right? Well, the reason they managed to figure that one out was because 6,000, 7,000, 8,000 years ago, nomads on the back of horses would travel around doing their nomady things. And on the back of their horses, they had little bags. And going from all around doing their nomady things, it agitated the bag. And they'd have a long, hard day of doing the nomady things. I don't know what nomads do.
Traveling
Nomading.
around.
Yeah, travelling around, having fun, you know what they do. And they go to get their milk out of their bag to have a nice sip of fresh milk. And inside the bag, there ain't no milk. It's all butter.
With loads of like water around it.
Yeah, a bit weird.
Just
But
water and fat.
because humans are weird, they decided to eat it. And that's how we found butter. I, for one, if I was expecting a liquid and what was in the bag was a weird yellow substance,
Yeah.
I would not eat it.
And it would be like warm as well, right? If you're just, I mean, I get maybe you're in a colder environment, but you know, you've been hanging out with it
It's
all day,
unpleasant.
right?
Yeah, I don't think I'd put it in my mouth. Anyway, Rach, you are a vegan, right?
Correct.
I want you to read this next slide.
Okay.
As the representative vegan who therefore doesn't eat butter.
But Jen, what if I don't like eating something that's from a cow's nipples?
Well, there's one thing you have to do.
Okay.
You have to use Marge.
Oh my god.
Don't we just love a good joke?
There she is.
Marge or margarine, or sometimes oleomargarine. Americans sometimes call it oleo or oleo. But here in the UK, we call it margarine.
Is Oleo like a brand or something?
No, oleo, it comes from the, it was originally called oleomargarine. The original inventor called it. And we'll talk about that in a second. Basically, to make margarine, what you need is a tub full of oil of some description, oil or fat of some description. Heat it up, And it separates into the solids, which you use for the margarine, and the liquids, which you would use for other purposes. Maybe you'd use it for cooking or whatever. On a very basic level, that's how you make margarine. Obviously, the margarine you get in shops right now isn't just, they put some sunflower oil in a pan and heated it and then skimmed off the top, because obviously they put preservatives and flavourings and all those sorts of things in it. But in general, if you want to make margarine, you just heat up some oil of some description and skim the fat, the solidified fat off the top, and use that as your spread.
Interesting. Is that like, because the fats that would rise to the top would be least dense, and they'd probably be least dense because they're like funny shapes, very like kinky shapes. I'm just thinking of my chemistry lesson.
Yeah, I think it is something like.
And that's the shape of fat molecules that turn into a solid when it cools. Then.
Yeah, probably. I don't know. It's actually really hard to find any information about margarine online, because you search for margarine and all you get is like new age, like people who don't necessarily understand what they're talking about going, oh, margarine, it's got chemicals in it, therefore it's bad. Get a lot of that.
Nat's explanation does resemble the memory that I have of something my GCSE chemistry teacher said about margarine, so I trust it.
Well, it's no different to like getting the cream off of milk. You separate the fat, the fattier fat,
right,
from the milk to make cream, right?
And it rises up.
So it's essentially the same thing. You're just heating it to make sure they separate.
Yeah, it's really interesting.
Margarine was invented in 1869 by this guy on the left here, a guy called Hippolyte Mejmoy, a French guy. He entered a competition set by the man on the right here, a guy called Napoleon III.
Oh.
And what Napoleon wanted was, he wanted a butter substitute, because all of his soldiers were going out onto the front lines, and butter was labour intensive to get, expensive, didn't keep very well, was not a great thing to be sending to soldiers on the front lines. So he wanted a substitute for that. He wanted some way of giving people the same benefit of butter without the downsides of butter. So Hippolyte Mejmoy, good bit of French accent there. Yeah. He entered this competition and he invented oleomargarine, or oleomargarine. I don't know how to actually say it, because we don't call it that in the UK. And he originally made it out of beef tallow and various other fats and oils. So the original margarine wasn't actually vegetarian or vegan.
Actually, most margarine now isn't vegetarian. It's got some milk in it. Yeah.
Or not vegan.
Or they'll either use buttermilk to add some flavour, or they'll use like a thickening agent. Some sort of lactosyphon or something, which is a thickening agent. This oleomargarine wasn't particularly popular in his native France, and Hippolyte Mejmoy died penniless, essentially. Not penniless, he was still a chemist, but he died relatively penniless, not seeing the fruits of his labour about 10-15 years after he invented margarine. But he did in that time sell the rights to other people to make margarine, and it was particularly popular in America. Margarine was popular in America because it was cheaper, it was easier to produce, and it tasted basically the same as butter. Unfortunately, Big Butter didn't like margarine.
No, it wouldn't.
And Big Butter had lots of propaganda and lots of lobbying to the American government. You see here, this is a cartoon from a year. And on the left is supposedly this is the margarine factory.
Who
Where they're
knows
putting
what's going on
anything
in
they
there?
want. Yeah, anything they want. They're putting dogs, they're putting boots, they're putting chemicals in there. And on the right, we've got her lovely, healthy, pure butter.
Sweet scented.
Yes. This all culminated in 1886 with the Margarine Act, which was a US federal act which Big Butter lobbied for to make a tax on margarine, essentially making it more expensive than butter.
That's really interesting, because margarine literally is just like much, much cheaper than butter, isn't it? So
Yeah. It even went so far as in big cattle farming, dairy farming areas such as Maine, Michigan, Minnesota, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Ohio, they actually made margarine illegal.
Wow. Wow.
Yes.
And dairy farmers, under capitalism at least, are not like, without proper regulation, they're not doing the best for their consumers.
Oh, yeah.
And, I mean, people used to put alkali in milk so that they wouldn't taste the sourness for longer, and so for that reason kids used to die all the time from drinking spoiled milk. It's just it's not good. It's not better just because it doesn't have chemicals.
I'm just thinking as well.
It might still have chemicals.
Might also poison you with
Well, margarine was still relatively popular, despite this big butter margarine tax. And one of the things that margarine had to do, because margarine, when it comes out, is basically pure white, was it had to dye itself. They had to dye the margarine before selling it in order to make it look more like butter. And by 1902, Big Butter had lobbied even harder to make it so that it was illegal for margarine companies to sell their butter dyed. No, sorry, sell their margarine dyed rather than butter.
They're like, this is fraud. Everyone needs to see how disgusting and pale this is.
Yeah. Of course, Big Butter was still dyeing their own butter.
Oh, of course they were.
Because they were not feeding their cows properly. So their cows were making butter that was white. So they were dyeing their butter, even though they were forcing the margarine people to not dye their own butter.
Cheeky. I'm also looking at this cartoon and I'm like, is this the same era as Rach was talking about with the patent medicine, where they were literally just like eating cocaine like sweets and feeding it to their children? But they're like, margarine banned.
Yeah. Well, this all culminated in margarine manufacturers being clever, and they would often sell margarine with these little dye packs, which you can see on the left here. You would get your margarine in a packet, and it would have a little dye capsule.
Wow.
And you would pop the dye capsule and mix the dye in with your margarine to make it look more like butter. And you do that at home because it wasn't mixed in a factory or anything. It was legal to do that.
That's incredible. It's incredible that people would want to bother, right? Like, it's the same thing. It's just a different colour.
They care so much.
And
so much
mixing bowl mess. Like, people were bothering to mix it just with food colouring in a bowl before that, presumably.
Yeah, but then people do that with icing today. So I guess it's the same.
Yeah. At one point, Big Butter tried to make it so that you had to sell margarine dyed weird colours like pink and brown. Specifically to prevent this sort of thing as well.
That is so
but that was
extra.
shut down.
Yeah,
that was shut down because they basically it went against because having to put something in was more difficult to get through the courts than making something come out, if that makes sense.
That makes a lot of sense, yeah.
And it's the right decision. Also.
Yeah. Margarine maintained its sort of underdog status right up until about World War II, when things like rationing and it being a cheaper substance to make meant that it was able to reduce some of the taxes it got put on it, and become a bit more popular. And margarine and butter have essentially swapped places on sort of how popular they are around the world throughout the last 60, 70 years, to a point where they're now sort of kind of even. It's like 55-45 for one of them. I think it's margarine gets more.
It's just so much cheaper. Like, I guess probably most people don't necessarily prefer the taste of margarine over butter. I'm not sure, but it is just a lot cheaper, so people are going to buy it.
There's a lot of, like, you know, chefs, but also advertising will say, you know, real butter, you've got to use real butter, it's proper, it's better. But I don't prefer I don't think I like the taste of butter. I prefer that.
I really love the taste of butter, and I definitely do prefer it, but it just depends what you're making, like, you know, what your tastes are. Yeah.
So, like, sometimes you just use a spread for lubrication.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Like, you just want it to go down your throat a little bit easier.
You don't necessarily taste butter in a sandwich that strongly, right? So margarine's the same thing. Like.
Yeah. It's funny. There were like, as people were trying to rescind the taxes, you had like situations where like politicians would go, margarine just tastes worse, and then there were like a blind taste test, and there was this one politician who was like big in like one of the butter states, which is like, I could tell margarine apart from anything, and so they did this blind taste test, and he got it wrong. Like, he couldn't tell he said the margarine was better than the butter.
He couldn't believe it wasn't butter.
Well, the reason he got it wrong was because for the last 10 years his wife had been replacing his butter with margarine because she was worried about his heart.
Oh my god, that's so funny.
Oh, that's very sneaky, but it's good to know his wife cares. I guess.
Yeah.
It's just like...
Anyway, that's butter. Anything to add about butter?
That's great.
No,
what an amazing journey.
I'm really just trying to figure out the ethics of secretly switching out somebody's food for 10 years.
Yeah, it's not.
I understand the reasoning. I don't know if I like the tactic there.
If you're the person making all the food and it's really just a substitution for something that's basically the same, I know it's fine. It just happened to have led to an embarrassing situation for this man in particular.
Yeah, I bet he was mad about it. If his opinions on butter are that strong, I bet he was mad about it.
Yeah.
Your Who Wants to Be a Millionaire thing looks way fancier than my Who Wants to Be a Millionaire thing.
Yeah, I was like, this is why I was like, I spent way more time than I should have on this. Cause,
I love it.
Because this slide alone took me an hour.